Hey everyone, we're live. Really excited to see everybody trickle in. Welcome to our webinar on cocoa. Happy early Valentine's Day. So as people roll in, would love to sort of kick things off. We're excited to welcome Francisco and Robin to lead the session today. So I'll hand it over to Francisco for some intros and then to kick us off for the session.
Yeah, first of all, thank you everyone for coming. A very happy Valentine's Day. I think, um, I presume, Robin, we should talk about this. It might be the day where you folks buy the most chocolate leading ahead to it. One of the interesting parts, I think, the day that people buy the most avocados is leading up to the Super Bowl, which I've always found very interesting because it's now become the most common time to have guacamole is America's favorite pastime. But
Okay.
go ahead, Robin.
So no, it's interesting that the avocados come into play because the same is true for chocolate. So the chocolate manufacturers don't wake up on the 13th of February thinking, oh, it's time we produced Valentine's chocolate. No, it takes a while to build up the requirements by the manufacturers in order to deliver to a particular day or event or whatever it is. And the same is true of avocados. So you can't suddenly think, oh, well, it's time to plant an avocado and hopefully it will all be fully grown in a day and I can ship it to wherever it needs to go. So there is quite a lot of planning that's needed and an
Yeah,
awful lot of marketing.
yeah, and I think this is one of the more interesting things we'll be able to talk about, right? I think, for these types of perennial trees, it just takes such a long time to make those decisions. But so, Sabrina, sorry, I think I forgot to introduce myself and certainly Robin. So for folks that are new to our webinar series, I'm Francisco Martin-Rayo, CEO of Helios Artificial Intelligence. It's great to be here with you guys. Helios, as I think many of you know, predicts the price and climate risk of agricultural commodities, 75 of them across 90 countries, more than anyone else ever in the world. Robin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. My name is Robin Dand, and I'm the Secretary General of the Federation of Cocoa Commerce, and we supply the terms, the contract terms, and arbitration services for people who wish to trade cocoa throughout the world for international sales. So that's what we do. We also are involved in education and training. So we are at the center of that particular part of the cocoa industry.
And folks, and for the audience, Robin is the person that I know that knows the most about cocoa, and so we couldn't be more thrilled to have him on the show. I think it'll be a really fun conversation. So,
Well,
Robin, go ahead, Robin. Yeah.
so well, thank you, Francisco. All I can say is that perhaps you don't know too many people. So, but anyway, thank you for that, for those words.
Of course, yeah. I think it'll be really fun. We had a couple conversations before this, and maybe if we take a step back, right, and we look at the cocoa system as a whole, kind of what's happening with volatility? What does it really look like? When people really think about cocoa, they think about chocolate, right? We've talked about that. Not always this global system. How would you describe the cocoa market today in simple terms?
Well, in simple terms, the market is recovering from high prices. So the price of cocoa has dropped quite considerably over the last 2 years when it reached what some consider to be a very high price. Um, I'm a little bit older than I look. And in point of fact, when I first started in cocoa, the price at that point was the highest that it had reached, and in real terms, it was roughly about 25 to 30,000 pounds per ton.
Mhm.
Um,
Wow.
so so 10,000 pounds or $10,000, $12,000 is high, and it reached it in unprecedented ways. But in my view, it's not necessarily the highest price ever. Um,
Yeah.
So what do high prices cause? They cause the manufacturers to consider their positions and to reflect deeply on how they use cocoa, and whether or not there can be any substitutes, and what else they can squeeze out of the system. And on the other point is that growers of cocoa see an opportunity and say, well, actually, it's worth my while to buy fertilizers, to plant more, to do more, to increase the amount of cocoa that I can grow.
Yeah.
And therefore, the supply of cocoa increases.
And so
So what we,
I was
yeah,
just,
so what we,
this is
go on.
really interesting, right? Because you have your manufacturers, your buyers of cocoa, and then you have your producers. But one of the interesting points is how long does it typically take? If I said starting tomorrow, I'd like to be a cocoa farmer, I have to go plant the trees. How long does it take for those trees to start producing?
Well, it depends on the variety that you plant, but let's assume that you know what you're about. You will get a crop within 4 years. Um, it won't be the optimal amount, but that will increase, and your optimum period would be probably 12 to 20 years, something like that, when production would be an optimal amount,
And
maybe
so
longer.
it's really interesting, right? Because you see the price go up to $10,000, $12,000, and then it goes. I mean, it's gone down, I think, what, 60% or so since.
Yeah.
And so, how do you, as this, and it's true, I think, right, that most producers are smallholder farmers. Don't really have
Yeah.
this, unlike row crops. How do you typically see those decisions being made? Because maybe you say, well, cocoa's now at 10 or 12,000, but it might not be in 4 years. And so, how
Yeah.
do they balance making those decisions?
Very difficult. And most of the cocoa that's grown comes from two countries, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, and both have different systems, but systems in which effectively protect or insulate, I think is probably a better word, insulate the farmer from the world price of cocoa. And the idea is that the state knows better than the grower, and that therefore they are the people who need to control things. And so they have introduced a degree of stability that in those countries that the growers not really had before, and that has prompted an increase in production. But it's produced an increase in production insulated from where everyone else is. And so therefore you do get these imbalances. And unlike a lot of other commodities,
Mhm.
you can keep cocoa. So in
How
another
long can you keep
life,
cocoa?
so in another lifetime, I in 2016 I came across 50 tons of cocoa that I personally put into store in
Wow.
1986. And the bags were rubbish, but the cocoa was all right. So this was stored in Hamburg, in a temperate zone, obviously, and so you can keep cocoa for considerable amounts of time. I won't say that the cocoa is optimal,
Yeah.
because the free fatty acids would increase within that, but nonetheless, it keeps quite well in comparison to other commodities.
That's so interesting, right? Because that's the second part of the equation. You have your buyers and your manufacturers, and so, if you're, we won't name names, right? You're a large CPG, and a big part of your business comes from selling chocolates. You see that the price of cocoa is now, 2 or 3 times or 4 times higher than it was. You don't know how long it'll last. But if you're making any of these decisions in terms of how much to buy, how much to put in, these also take, 6, 12, 18 months to go through the supply chain. And so is that part of the dynamic we're seeing today where, you had more farmers that were investing. Maybe fertilizer probably gives you the recent bump, right? Better climate, but how is the manufacturing and the buyer input
Well,
being
y
reflected?
yes, and well, quite frankly, no matter how well the reflection is of the manufacturer, that need not necessarily go back to the grower. And I think that's a fundamental problem. So, and at the moment, what we're seeing is a large amount of stock that is being held at origin
Hmm.
because the origins cannot pay the prices that they promised. So there is unsold cocoa lying at origin, um, which for which the producers have promised the farmer a price which was maybe reflective of a year ago or whatever. And so therefore they can only realize all of this at a loss. And that is a fundamental problem with the systems that they adopt.
That's
It's all
so
very well in a
interesting.
rising market, but in a falling market, you get found out.
That's so to simplify it for some of our members. So these were contracts that were made 12 months ago at a much higher price than the cocoa prices today. You're holding
In
a
effect,
large amount of inventory at origin, right, in Sierra Leone and Cote d'Ivoire, um, other Ghana, presumably, right, other places.
yeah.
Um, but the producers say, well, you promised that you would pay X for the contract. Your buyers are saying,
Well,
well, the spot price is now significantly lower. Or,
no, it's all to do with the origins. So while the prices were high, they promised the farmer a price based on, at that price, and so they promised the farmers to pay a higher price than than what is available now when they try and sell. So this is where they have come unstuck with an unhedged position, um, um, and are now faced with the prospect of realizing a substantial loss unless they are able to talk to their buyers and try and work out a way forward. We've been here before, and I regret to say we'll probably be here again if this system continues.
it's so interesting.
Um,
So let's talk about the hedging part a little bit, right? Because cocoa is very unique in the sense that I think there's multiple exchanges you can trade it on, and there seems to be a fair amount of liquidity, uh, but it's much smaller. I mean, I think we talked about this before, right? In comparison to wheat or beans or corn, right? I mean, maybe help us understand
yes.
that dynamic.
Okay, okay. The size of the market. So cocoa represents probably 5 million tons, 4.5 million, whatever, whatever number you particularly want to wish to accept. Um, and so, in comparison to other commodities, it's minuscule. It's very small. So the wheat market, the dairy market is, well, the dairy market at one stage I know was 650 million tons a year, um, and cocoa is sitting at 5 million. So that gives you an idea of the size, and
Yeah.
yet it is significant, and it has that role in my view because um, the people who are involved in trading cocoa have a real risk that they need to look after, um, and because cocoa is, well, obviously it's important, as I would say, but it's not essential to the
Yeah.
well-being of everyone. So if you lost your chocolate tomorrow, you wouldn't necessarily die because of it. Whereas with grains or something, they have a much more significant role within the well-being of the population. So um, governments tend to steer clear of cocoa. And
Interesting.
because of that, we have a very active set of markets. So there's two futures markets, one in London and one in New York. And there is significant amount of business that's done between the two, people buying one and selling the other and then reversing out their position. It's called the arbitrage market. And the two markets are very different. Oh, sorry, not very different, but are different enough to prompt people to be interested in seeing what it is that they can do between them. So you've got this quite small market with an underlying total of 5 million tons supporting two futures markets, which is unusual, I would say. And they are able to do that principally because those people who need the market are not cannot rely on a government to step in and sort out their issues.
And so the role of speculative traders, and we don't mean that in a derogatory term, right? The folks who the last thing they want is to actually receive, 1 million metric tons of cocoa. Um, are they exacerbating sometimes that movement, right? So maybe cocoa wouldn't have gone all the way to 12,000, might have gone to 9, but you had this sudden. Has that interest gone away? Does it come in to provide liquidity, or how have you seen that change?
I think it changes. There used to be individuals who would take on the role of a speculator, whereas now there are many more funds and institutional operations which are acting effectively as speculators. Some of the attendees today may think, oh, well, speculators, that's a bad thing. Actually, it's not, because without the speculators, there would not necessarily be the liquidity available for people to buy and sell with freedom. So if everybody thought the market was going to go up, that would stop anyone from selling into it, and the market would just carry on upwards. And likewise, the other way around. So that that is not useful if you're trying to hedge your position. So you need speculators in order to oil the wheels to make the whole thing work. Do they cause upsets? No, they don't cause the upsets, but they will exacerbate them, as you quite rightly pointed out. So a move will go further than perhaps it would without their intervention. But they need to be in there in order to oil the wheels. How much in speculation is a moot point, and I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, just anecdotally, right? We work with hedge funds, and for a period of time, we had a lot of them reach out and want cocoa information, and that has kind of declined a bit. But before we shift to, I know we both have an interest in climate. So folks that are on the webinar, put your questions in. We'd love to take them as we're going through the conversation rather than at the end. Sabrina, I don't know if we have any questions that folks have put in. Otherwise, we're happy to shift to part of the climate conversation, which I'm excited for. Perfect. No questions yet. Keep putting them in. On climate, Robin, I know we've talked about El Nino and La Nina a bit as these really interesting climate phenomena, but I'd love your view on how you see it broadly, kind of both impact the markets, how you see it impact yield and production and all that.
Well, thank you for that. For those who perhaps are not aware, this oscillation that occurs is known as the El Nino or La Nina, depending on what is going on, and it is the single biggest climatic event or situation phenomena in the world, and it does have an effect on cocoa. So if you were to force me to suggest where to look for the prices for the next year, I would tentatively suggest for people to look at the 3.2 region of the Pacific, and the temperature variation which occurs with the mid-month being August. So if there is going to be a strong El Nino, and it needs to be a strong one, that will affect the prices the following year. So it is an interesting leader, but it needs to be strong, and it needs to be understood for what it is, which is more than Robin Dand sitting here, because I know there are people around who don't believe me, but I think that's one of the better leaders for where prices are going to go, because it is such a big event, and it does affect not only the weather in South America, but also in West Africa as well.
And it does impact. I mean, we have a large, largest or second largest buyer of pineapples in the United States is one of our customers, and El Nino impacts Thailand very differently. So if you have a very strong El Nino, you have a lot of drought, which obviously has a negative impact on the production yields there. How do you typically see those impacts of El Nino on cocoa production?
Well, I think with global warming, we will see more of these types of events. I think with more energy in the atmosphere, basically we're going to experience more variations, and so we're going to see more of this type of incident. So there was. But it needs for cocoa for it to be meaningful. As far as I can see, it needs to be a strong El Nino, and that has an effect. And all I can say to viewers is don't take what Robin Dand says at all.
Maybe take some of it. Some of it.
Well, go and have a look and come to your own conclusions, and at least then you'll learn something about El Nino, and you'll learn something about cocoa prices, which will be of help. So.
Yeah, well, especially for folks, one of the interesting parts is the larger customers that will work in. People do switch in and out, right? So I think for traders or smaller customers, you have people who are really specialized in buying a particular type of commodity. But if you're at a Fortune 100 company, maybe you bought plastics for the last 2 years, and then the next 2 years you're buying cocoa and a couple of other things, and then you switch to something else, aluminum or something. So I think this is why this is so helpful. One of the things that we found just quickly broadly across the world is we're really focused on these erratic precipitation patterns. As we understand it, as the world gets warmer on average, right? So some places are a little less warm, some places are a lot warmer than the 1.52 degrees centigrade. Apparently the atmosphere can hold a lot more moisture and humidity than before. And so it takes longer for the rains to come. And when they do come, they're much more violent and much more precipitous, if you will, than before. And so it's been very difficult for a lot of producers to deal with that. You might still have, if you used to have 30 inches of rain in the month of January or March or something, you've gone from having, you still have 30 inches of rain, but you'll probably have 2 days of 15 inches each, or 3 days of 10 inches each, and then no rain. And it makes it really difficult to stabilize production and to understand what the right yield will be.
Yes, and you raise an interesting point, which is one of physics, really. I mean, warm air will retain more moisture than cold air. So I can understand the loading aspect of what you've basically been talking about, and that can, if rain comes around, say during the flowering of cocoa, that will knock the flowers off, and lo and behold, you've got a problem. So yeah, completely take that.
It's so interesting, right? Because the timing is so important. We have an interesting question in the chat. It says, "Are there any regions where cocoa is safe from El Nino or La Nina, especially emerging regions, and what are those emerging regions?"
Yes, I would. I'm not an expert in the weather at all, and I must say that from what I've seen, not really, because if you say there are three main growing areas, um, Central and South America, well, that's affected by El Nino. West Africa, that seems to be affected by El Nino. And you're looking at the Far East, and that too is affected by El Nino. So I think that it does have an effect throughout the world, and you have to understand that the majority of production at the moment um, is coming from West Africa. I think we may well be seeing a shift back towards South and Central America, but it's too soon to comment on that. So I don't think there is anywhere that's not affected.
Yeah, and on that, this is one of the most interesting things I think we'll cover together over the next few years is, I mean, to your point, right? It'll take a decade, plus or minus, to see that full shift of production going away from kind of West Africa into South America. How do you think that'll change? And we'll go to this question in a second, John, but how do you think that'll change the market? Because it does feel, I think, Robin, one of the things you said is you have these boards in West Africa that try to protect or, yeah, I think you used a better word, right? Mitigate some of the risks of volatility for smallholder farmers. I don't know if that exists in South America, so it does feel like a different system.
Completely.
Yeah.
And I think that you have to build into this assumption that it's going to move to South and Central America, in understanding that the majority of growers in West Africa are smallholders, and they are very, very resilient, and they can exist on low yields and low prices for an extended period. So don't necessarily write off what's coming out of Africa, but understand the limitations that exist with regards to their methods of production, which are not necessarily the ones that you or I would follow. That's for sure.
Interesting. So a question from John: what are your thoughts on West Africa's efforts to gain greater control over the global cocoa market, including initiatives such as the Cote d'Ivoire Ghana Cocoa Initiative or CIGCI and the proposed African Cocoa Exchange, which a few stakeholders are promoting?
Yeah, well, there is a saying in all markets, and that is that nobody is bigger than the market. So the Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana Cocoa Initiative, I wish them well, but I don't think they will be successful. So that's my own personal view, and I'm not sure that it would be seen to be working that way. I mean, there is a reason why the futures markets are in London and New York, and that one of the reasons is that they are not in growing areas.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one of the precursors for a successful futures market. And New York and London have been trading since at least the 1920s. So there is a sustained track record of being successful, which has not started from origin countries. The last one that I'm aware of, the last futures market that I'm aware of, was actually started by the Malaysians, who wanted to have a a futures market, and they started it at 8 o'clock on the 8th of August, 1988. And
Very
it didn't
auspicious
work.
numbers, yeah.
Well, for the Chinese.
Hmm.
So it didn't work. They had plenty of sellers, but not enough buyers. And that's the problem with starting an exchange, a futures exchange, at origin.
Yeah,
There are other exchanges which I think would work at origin, but they're not futures markets.
yeah, that's really interesting. Just one last question, and I think we have an interesting user question. One of the things that's been fun for us to see, right, is a lot of the talk around climate change has been very negative, understandably, right? But one of the shifts we're starting to see is there's both peril and promise in climate change. And if you're a British champagne grower, that's something that was impossible 10 years ago. I haven't yet tasted British champagne, but I've heard some of it is quite good. Um, you
It's
know,
quite expensive.
it's quite expensive, right? This is very surprising. So it's not only available, but it costs a premium over something else. You have Italian mangoes. We've seen that grow. Again, it's still small as a total percentage of production, but one of our viewers says, "Well, we see Spanish and Greek cocoa beans in our lifetime." Smiley face. But maybe more broadly, where are some of the places that you think you'd be most surprised to see cocoa beans growing?
Well, I am surprised. So we have cocoa growing here in the UK. Um, so
I didn't know
we
that. That's
have
fascinating. Yeah.
we are not commercially, but the University of Reading hosts the only temperate zone quarantine station in the world. So if you are a scientist and you want a particular variety of cocoa, you should really apply to the University of Reading, the quarantine station, in order to get your supplies. Then you know that the variety that you're after will be disease free. Um, if you go along and take a cutting from a particular farm or whatever, you have no idea what diseases you may be obtaining, and inadvertently. So cocoa is maintained in the University of Reading. There are about 400 accessions that are available. And the University of Reading also has greenhouses where they are able to conduct a number of experiments. One main area which I've been involved in concerns climate change. So how is cocoa affected, and what ways is it affected, and what can be done to mitigate things? So that's an area which I'm surprised
Yeah.
is about 30 miles from where I'm sitting right now. So
So interesting.
yeah,
And
it's
what have you found that is most surprising in terms of a positive or negative impact that you're seeing of climate change on cocoa?
well, it's not all bad news.
Yeah.
So if you grow cocoa in elevated temperatures with increased carbon dioxide as a result, you can get increased yields up to a certain point, which I think is probably 38 degrees, and then it's not, the cocoa tree is not happy. So yields will decline, but you need to make sure that the cocoa is irrigated as a result of that.
Yeah.
So that is something which requires not only the irrigation but also the surrounding mulch of the tree. And if you don't like such a low tech operation, you can get heavy duty mats which can surround the tree, and that retains the moisture within the soil in order to reduce the amount of irrigation that's needed, or the amount of water that's needed.
Interesting.
So it's not all bad news. but it may well be beyond the aspirations, the capabilities of a smallholder.
Well, and this is where price is so important, right? I mean, those are decisions those are investments you make at 10 or 12,000, right, or more, but maybe you don't make it at 4,000. So there is that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So it is a very moot point. For instance, one of the, again, I'm talking about my own views. One of the reasons why I think Ecuador has done so well in the production of cocoa is because they've got access to cheap fuel, so they can power the pumps that's required to irrigate things much more cheaply than perhaps you would have elsewhere. So one particular plantation, I went around some time ago now. They had two lakes really. One was 20 hectares in size, and the other was 10 hectares in size.
Yeah.
And they used the water from those in order to irrigate their farms. And I'm sure that was only really possible because of cheap access to fuel.
Yeah. So it's not just your fixed investment, right, to set up the irrigation, but then your variable costs as well. You can make that cheap enough.
Yes. But if you're looking for higher yields, you've got to be prepared to put the effort in.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Viewers, we've got about 7-ish minutes, give or take, left. So any questions that you want to ask Robin, let's put them in the chat. We have a new question. Says, could you briefly explain the recent situation in Cote d'Ivoire where large volumes of beans have also remained unexported, but for reasons that differ from Ghana? For example, reports that some buyers have declined to take delivery of the final 10% of their contracted volumes due to weaker consumer demand and or lower cocoa prices. Good question.
Well, yes, and thank you for that. Basically, it's because of a falling market. So the authorities in both countries are finding it difficult to pay the farmers the price that they've promised, and that cocoa has remained unsold. So unhedged, unsold, and a real issue for both of the governments. What will happen is that this cocoa will be stored either up country or in the port area, and the quality will not get better. So I'm expecting to see poorer quality cocoa coming out of both of those countries when the exports do come, because at some point or other the exports are going to have to be made.
Yeah. And to that point, if you were advising a board or an executive team today, how should they be looking at the cocoa risk over the next 12, 24 months? What are the right questions they should be asking, right? And you know this, that the VP of procurement, SVP of procurement, they're typically not experts the way you are. And so what are some good framing, right? Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, but I'm not an expert. So I would, but perhaps I know a little bit more about the subject than some.
Certainly more than the usual chief procurement officer, I'll tell you that.
Well, I would say that they are trying to basically come into a fight with one hand tied behind their back.
Okay.
And the one thing that they need to take into account is the futures market. So the futures market is not really being used by them in the marketing of cocoa, and there may well be very good reasons for it. It requires an iron discipline, and it requires a knowledge of the market in areas which perhaps they're not familiar with. That help is around, and you don't have to ask one person. You can ask a number of different people and come to your own conclusions. But to ignore the basically the opportunity that exists from using the futures market, or indeed the options market, is not sensible in my view. So I don't know whether we mentioned this before, but yesterday 60,000 lots were traded in London and 40 odd thousand lots were traded in New York. So you say, okay, that's 100,000 lots. Well, that's 1 million tons of cocoa. That's a fifth of the world production in one day, that's traded on these two exchanges. So to not pay sufficient attention to what is going on there and how you can use that in order to make sure that you are protected is, well, I was going to call it a sin, but it's probably a bit too strong.
We can
But
call it.
it is a factor that I would want to know. So if I was a smallholder, I probably wouldn't trade the futures market because I'm a smallholder and I'm growing my cocoa. If I could, I would sell to someone who is using the futures market.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that I know that that person is likely to be in business when I come to delivery, and secondly, I know that someone has got a handle on what is going on. So I would at least expect that to go ahead. So that's the main area, and there are a number of different ways how origins can make use of a futures market, but that's basically it.
Yeah, and it almost feels like a mindset shift, right? Where if you are able to take delivery, and that's the point, right, of you engaging with the market, you should view it as an advantage against, speculators or folks that provide liquidity in the market, right? Because your goal is very different. It probably gives you more flexibility than you expect.
Yes, so take care with the question of delivery. So both New York and London are delivery markets for sure. But my intention as an origin would be not to go to delivery, but to use the market for financial purposes.
For hedging.
Because well, for the hedging. So the futures markets are designed so that cocoa of poor quality or of a buyer of least resort is where you would go for delivery. So I think that my cocoa would be better than that, and therefore I wouldn't want to see it going to delivery. But I do need the market to facilitate my hedging. So that's how I would use the market, or try to use the market. There are many more intelligent people who would be only too willing to explain how that could work. But I think that is the single biggest mistake that's going on.
Yeah, that's super helpful. One final question from the audience, and then I'll have one more question. It says, historically, the London market commanded a premium against the New York market. However, in the last few years, New York has traded at a premium to London. Can either of us, I'll say Robin, because I can't, explain why that has been the case, and if you see any change in the arbitrage for that?
Yes, well, thank you for that. It is a question fundamentally of supply and demand, and there is the Atlantic Ocean between delivery points in Europe and the United States. So there has been a difference on that. There's also a difference on the delivery question with regards to the form in which cocoa can be delivered. So in Europe, we can accept cocoa that's in bulk, whereas in America, it's all got to be in bags. So the very large tonnages which are shipped often in bulk, and there are specialist receivers, specialist warehouses to basically cater for that. And so piles of cocoa, 10, 15,000 tons are possible. And they can be discharged within days and stored accordingly. Yeah, it is quite a sight to see. I'm old school. I don't really like my cocoa being piled on the floor, but anyway, there we are. That it is a question of economics, and that is not possible in the States. So the States does tend to attract premium cocos, although it is true to say that premium cocos are also deliverable against the London market, but it's not a certainty. There would have to be a huge backwardation in order to make someone be prepared to deliver a premium cocoa to the exchange. It has happened, but it's not something that happens generally. I'm not sure I've answered the question, but anyway, it's been fun.
I think, and just the last question, and I totally understand if you can't answer this. Do you have a favorite chocolate brand that you know more about the quality and premium of cocoa? So
well, I get asked this question quite frequently. So if the final sentence of my book, The International Cocoa Trade, is given by the young lady, the young girl, and she says, "My favorite chocolate is the one that I've got in my mouth." So.
I think it's a wonderful way to end. Go look at Robin Dan's book. I think it's available as well. Robin, thank you so much for the time. I've really enjoyed this. I know our audience has as well. And happy Valentine's Day. What a wonderful way to kick off
Yes,
the holiday.
and yeah, and have a lot of fun. So
likewise, thanks again,
okay.
And thank you to everybody who joined in. We really appreciated the questions and the engagement.
Thank you.